The doctors said Ethan Mitchell might not make it through this fall, but that wasn't what left Sarah Mitchell frozen in place. What stole the air from her lungs was what came next. We believe there is someone out there who could save him. The problem is, we don't know who that person is. The consultation room at St. Joseph Medical Center fell into complete silence. Sarah sat motionless across from the doctor, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Outside the window, gray clouds drifted slowly across the Seattle sky. People continued walking along the streets below. Cars moved steadily through traffic. Life carried on as if nothing had happened. Only Sarah's world had just fallen apart. 4 months earlier, Ethan had been the healthiest man she had ever known. He was a bridge construction engineer. His job demanded long days under the sun, weeks spent on survey sites, and constant pressure. Yet Ethan never complained. He was always the last person to leave a work site, always the first to show up when someone needed help. His coworkers called him a rock, because Ethan was steady, always strong, always the person who made everyone else feel safe. Then things began to change. At first, the signs were small. He started coming home earlier than usual. His favorite dinners no longer excited him. He slept more. He grew more tired. Sarah thought it was nothing more than work stress, until one night. She woke up in the middle of the night and found Ethan sitting alone in the living room. He was bent forward, clutching his chest, gasping for air as though he'd just run for miles. In that moment, a cold wave of fear ran down her spine. The tests began. Blood work, ultrasounds, scans, then more tests, more doctors. More cold examination rooms filled with harsh white lights. Eventually the answer arrived. A rare inherited liver disease, aggressive, untreatable with medication, irreversible. If Ethan wanted to survive, he would need a liver transplant. Sarah remembered the day they received the diagnosis with painful clarity. She watched her husband sitting across from the doctor. His face was strangely calm, as though the man receiving a death sentence was someone else entirely. After the doctor left the room, Ethan turned and took her hand. He smiled. "Hey," Sarah burst into tears. Ethan kept smiling. "I'm not dead yet." That was Ethan. Even when standing at the edge of a cliff, he still thought about comforting everyone else. But Sarah knew the truth. She saw the nights when he couldn't sleep. She saw the fear in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. She saw the strongest man she had ever known growing weaker with each passing day. And there was something even worse. Ethan had no family. He had been adopted as an infant. He didn't know who his biological parents were. He didn't know whether he had brothers or sisters. He didn't know where his story truly began. For years, none of that had mattered. But now it had become the greatest obstacles standing between him and survival. Biological relatives were often the best source of potential organ donors, and Ethan had no one. Not a single person, not a single name, not a single lead. Sarah enrolled him in every support program she could find. She submitted applications to medical centers across the country. She contacted charitable organizations. She even hired a professional genealogist. Every path led nowhere. Every day that passed, Ethan's health continued to decline. Every week that passed, hope grew a little smaller. That morning, the doctor had called Sarah to the hospital earlier than usual. She thought they had good news. Maybe they had found a match. Maybe a miracle had finally appeared. But they hadn't. The news they brought was even more frightening. Ethan's body was deteriorating faster than expected. Time was running out. Sarah left the consultation room feeling completely numb. She walked through the long hospital corridor, the steady sound of shoes striking the tile floor, the beeping of heart monitors, nurses calling to one another, the wheels of carts rolling past. Everything blended into a distant hum that felt as though it belonged to another world. She stopped outside Ethan's room. Through the glass window she could see him sleeping. His face was much thinner than before. The arms that had once been strong enough to lift heavy steel beams were now little more than pale skin, stretched over visible veins. Sarah placed her hand against the glass. A single tear slipped silently down her cheek. What she didn't know in that moment was that more than 100 miles away, in a small coastal town in Oregon, a man was living an ordinary life. A man who had never met Ethan, a man who had never even heard the name Ethan Mitchell. Yet he was carrying a secret that could change all of their lives. And within just a few days, a truth that had been buried for more than 3 decades would finally begin to come to light. Before illness entered their lives, Sarah used to believe that she and Ethan were simply two ordinary people who had been lucky. Not wealthy, not famous, but happy. They met on a rainy afternoon at the Seattle Public Library. Sarah had just landed her first teaching job after years of studying. She was sitting in the children's reading section, preparing lesson plans for the upcoming week. Ethan appeared carrying a stack of engineering books in his arms. He was tall, dressed simply, with rainwater still clinging to his slightly messy hair. As he walked past Sarah's table, one of his books suddenly slipped from the stack and fell to the floor. Both of them bent down to pick it up at the same time. And that was how everything began. There were no fireworks, no dramatic movie moments. Just two lonely people unexpectedly finding peace in each other's presence. Their first date took place in a small coffee shop near the harbor. They talked for hours, about work, about their favorite books, about dreams they had not yet achieved. Sarah spoke about her desire to become the kind of teacher who could change a child's life. Ethan talked about the bridges he had helped build. He said the most rewarding part wasn't seeing a project completed. It was knowing that thousands of people would cross that bridge every day without ever knowing who built it. That was Ethan. He always cared more about creating value than receiving recognition. 2 years later, they got married. The wedding was simple, held beside Lake Washington. Nothing extravagant, nothing crowded. Just Sarah's adoptive family, a few close friends, and several co-workers. Ethan had no one standing on his side, no parents, no siblings, no biological relatives, yet he smiled the entire day. As he held Sarah's hands during the ceremony, he said something that brought tears to many eyes. Today is the first time in my life I've truly felt like I have a family. Sarah's never forgot those words. After the wedding, they bought an old house on the outskirts of Seattle. The house wasn't large. The porch was worn. The wooden fence leaned slightly to one side. But Ethan saw something others didn't. Potential. He spent nearly a year restoring every corner of the property. He replaced the flooring himself, built the kitchen cabinets himself, redesigned the backyard garden himself, every shelf, every doorway. Every piece of furniture carried the mark of his hands. Sarah often joked that if the house could speak, it would call Ethan its father. Life moved forward peacefully until they started thinking about children. At first, both of them believed it would happen naturally, but time passed. 1 year, then 2, and still no good news came. The medical tests began, the endless waiting rooms, the cycle of hope followed by disappointment, again and again. Eventually, the doctors reached a conclusion. Sarah's chances of conceiving naturally were almost non-existent. The day they received the news, she cried the entire drive home. She felt like a failure, as though she was stealing Ethan's dream of becoming a father. But Ethan reacted very differently. That evening, he sat beside her on the old sofa in the living room. Sarah couldn't even look him in the eyes. Through tears, she whispered, "You deserve a more complete family than this." The room fell silent for several seconds. Then Ethan gently lifted her chin. His eyes were steady. "Sarah, you are my family," just one sentence. Yet it was enough to break down every wall she had built around her heart. Sometime later, they adopted an abandoned dog from a rescue shelter. He had shaggy golden fur, one ear that always flopped down, and eyes that seemed permanently sad. They named him Charlie. No one expected Charlie to become the center of the entire household so quickly. Every morning he raced around the yard. Every evening he curled up at Ethan's feet while Ethan read a book. The once quiet house became filled with laughter. Yet even during their happiest years, there was still an empty space hidden deep inside Ethan. Sometimes Sarah would catch him staring at children who looked just like their parents, or lingering a little too long whenever he saw complete families together. One summer evening, while they were sitting on the porch, Ethan suddenly asked, "Do you think my biological parents are still alive?" Sarah froze. It was a subject he rarely mentioned. Ethan stared into the darkness beyond the yard. "Sometimes I wonder who they were. I wonder if they ever thought about me. I wonder if I have brothers or sisters somewhere out there." Sarah reached for his hand, but she didn't know how to answer. A few weeks later, Ethan gave up on the idea of searching. He said the past didn't matter anymore. He already had his own life. Sarah believed him. At least she did until the illness appeared. Because now's the very past he had buried for so many years might be the only thing capable of saving his life. And somewhere out there, a family secret that had been sleeping for more than 3 decades was waiting to be awakened. 2 weeks later, Ethan no longer had the strength to walk into the hospital on his own. Sarah had to push him through the long hallways illuminated by cold white lights in a wheelchair. With every passing day, the disease seemed to be taking pieces of him away, not just his health, but his time. The doctors who had once tried to stay optimistic were now becoming more cautious with their words. Expressions of sympathy appeared more and more often, and Sarah knew exactly what that meant. They were slowly running out of hope. That morning, Ethan was moved into a special care unit for closer monitoring. Sarah sat alone in the hospital cafe on the ground floor. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of her, long since gone cold. Her phone continued to light up with emails from transplant centers. No suitable match, no new updates, no miracle. Sarah read each message mechanically. Until her vision blurred, she finally set her phone down. For the first time in months, she felt truly afraid. Not afraid of the disease itself, but afraid of losing the one person who had stood beside her throughout her entire adult life. As she struggled to compose herself, an older man approached her table. He wore a hospital maintenance uniform. His hair was silver, his face kind and weathered. He pointed toward the phone screen that was still illuminated. A photograph of Sarah as Ethan, taken a few months earlier, filled the display. "Is that your husband?" Sarah nodded softly. The man studied the photo for several seconds. Then his eyebrows slowly drew together. A strange expression crossed his face, surprise, confusion, and something close to shock. Sarah's noticed it immediately. "Is something wrong?" The man hesitated. "I'm not sure if I should say anything." Sarah's heart began to pound. "Please." He looked back at the photo, then spoke slowly. "I've seen someone who looks exactly like him." Sarah froze. For a few seconds, she thought she had misheard him. "What do you mean?" "My nephew lives in Astoria, Oregon. I visited him a few years ago. There was a man working at a local shipyard." The man shook his head. "I swear to you, he looks so much like your husband, it was almost frightening." The air around Sarah seemed to stop moving. A strange sensation ran through her body. Her mind told her it had to be a coincidence. But her heart whispered something different. For years, Ethan had wondered whether he had biological family somewhere in the world, whether he had brothers or sisters, whether someone else carried those same blue eyes, that same smile. And now a complete stranger had casually told her something that felt impossible. Sarah thanked the man and hurried back to Ethan's room. He was asleep. His face looked pale beneath the hospital lights. The heart monitor beside him emitted a steady rhythm of soft beeps. Sarah sat beside his bed, looking at the man she loved. The man who had always stayed strong for her, and for the first time in months, a spark of hope appeared. Small, fragile, but bright enough to pierce the darkness. That evening, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Sarah opened an old storage box they kept in a closet at home. Inside were all of Ethan's adoption records. Documents more than 3 decades old, faded copies, worn stamps, yellowed pages. Sarah carefully examined every file, until she noticed something unusual. Several records had been sealed. Certain information had been completely blacked out. The names of his biological parents, his exact birthplace, parts of his hospital records. Everything was hidden. Sarah frowned. It didn't make sense. Most adoption records could eventually be accessed after enough years had passed. But Ethan's file looked as though someone had deliberately erased his history. The deeper she looked, the more uneasy she became, as though there was something much larger hidden behind the story. That night, Sarah barely slept. She sat beside the hospital window. The lights of Seattle cast a soft glow across the clouds above the city. Charlie lay curled up near Ethan's bed, occasionally lifting his head toward his owner before settling back down. Sarah gently stroked the dog's fur. Questions filled her mind. Who was the man in Astoria? Why had Ethan's records been hidden? Were the two connected? And most importantly, could that man actually be Ethan's family? Shortly before dawn, Sarah made a decision. She would find the answers herself, not tomorrow, not next week, as soon as possible, because if she waited any longer, there might not be another chance. She looked over at Ethan. He was still asleep, completely unaware that hundreds of miles away, a secret buried for more than 30 years was beginning to stir. And within just a few days, the search for Ethan's origins would change the lives of everyone involved forever. 3 days later, Sarah stood outside Ethan's hospital room with a small travel bag slung over her shoulder. She had taken a leave of absence from work. She had prepared everything she might need, and most importantly, she had made a decision that could change their lives forever. Ethan seemed slightly more alert that morning. His eyes drifted toward the bag, and he frowned. "Are you going somewhere, Sarah?" Forced a smile that wasn't entirely real, just taking care of a few things. Ethan studied her longer than usual. Maybe he sensed something. Maybe he knew she was hiding more than she was saying. But in the end, he simply nodded. "Come back to me, okay?" Sarah squeezed his hand tightly. "I promise." She didn't tell him about Astoria. She didn't tell him about the mysterious man. She didn't tell him about the fragile hope she was chasing. Because she was afraid. Afraid that everything might turn out to be nothing more than a coincidence. Afraid of giving Ethan hope, only to watch it shatter all over again. Her car sped down the endless coastal highway. Gray clouds hung low across the Oregon sky. Tall pine trees stretched for miles alongside the road. Sarah drove for hours. The image of Ethan lying in that hospital bed never left her mind. Every time she thought about the time slipping away from them, she pressed a little harder on the accelerator. By late afternoon, Astoria finally appeared on the horizon, a peaceful coastal town resting beside the Columbia River. Fishing boats lined the harbor. Weathered wooden houses climbed the hillsides overlooking the water. Everything about the place felt different from Seattle. Slower, quieter. And somehow, it made Sarah feel as though she was getting closer to the truth. Her first stop was the shipyard the hospital employee had mentioned. The sound of metal clanging echoed throughout the property. The smell of machine oil and damp wood filled the air. Sarah stepped into the administrative office. Her heart pounded inside her chest. "I'm looking for someone named Michael Reed." The receptionist looked up. "He's over at Dock 3. Sarah thanked her and hurried outside. With every step toward the repair yard, her stomach tightened. Then she saw him. A man standing beside the steel hull of a ship. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark brown hair. When he turned around, Sarah nearly forgot how to breathe. It wasn't that he looked exactly like Ethan. It was the similarities, the blue eyes, the shape of his jaw, the half-smile, even the way he tilted his head while thinking. Everything reminded her of Ethan. Michael noticed the strange look on the face of the unfamiliar woman approaching him. He stepped forward. "Can I help you?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She pulled out her phone, opened the most recent photo she had taken with Ethan, and held it out for him to see. Michael looked down at the screen. The smile vanished from his face. His entire body seemed to freeze. Several seconds passed. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Michael looked up. His face had gone noticeably pale. "Who is this?" Sarah felt her heart racing. "My husband." Michael stared at the photo again. For a long time, as though trying to convince himself that what he was seeing couldn't possibly be real. Then he slowly shook his head. "That's impossible." Sarah took a deep breath. "I don't think it is." A short while later, the two of them sat in a small coffee shop near the harbor. Sarah told him everything. About Ethan's illness, about his adoption, about the sealed records, about the questions that had never been answered. Michael listened in silence. His expression grew more troubled with every passing minute. Then, Sarah mentioned Ethan's birth year. Michael suddenly set his coffee cup down so hard it struck the table with a sharp crack. Several people nearby turned to look. "Wait." His voice sounded strained. "Was he born in November?" Sarah nodded. Michael sat completely still, his eyes focused somewhere far away, as though an old memory had suddenly resurfaced. Several moments passed before he finally spoke. "When I was a kid, I remember hearing my grandmother talk about something." Sarah held her breath. Michael looked directly at her. "I was 3 years old. My mother gave birth to another baby boy, but the baby disappeared shortly after he was born. A chill spread through Sarah's body. Michael continued. My grandmother once said my mother gave him away, and after that, no one ever talked about it again. Outside the cafe window, seagulls circled above the gray water. Inside, the air felt heavy. Two strangers sat across from one another, and both were beginning to realize an astonishing possibility. Maybe, just maybe, the man lying in a hospital bed in Seattle, and the man sitting across from Sarah now, were more than lookalikes. They could be brothers, and if that turned out to be true, Ethan's life was about to change forever. Sarah could barely remember how she had driven back from Astoria to Seattle. The entire journey passed in a blur. One sentence echoed through her mind over and over again. They could be brothers. Could. Such a simple word. Yet at that moment, it was the only thing keeping her moving forward. By the time she returned to the hospital, night had already fallen. Golden lights reflected across the rain-soaked parking lot. Sarah hurried through the familiar hallways. Her heart pounded when she saw Ethan still lying in his hospital bed. He opened his eyes as she entered. A faint smile appeared on his face. You're back. Sarah took his hand. For the first time in weeks, there was something in her eyes besides fear, hope. The following morning, Michael arrived at the hospital. He walked through the doors of the medical unit with a tense but determined expression. The moment Ethan saw him, the entire room seemed to fall silent. The two men stared at each other, neither spoke. Yet the resemblance between them was impossible to ignore. Even the nurse on duty paused mid-step. A doctor passing by glanced back for a second look. Ethan sat motionless in his bed. Michael remained standing near the doorway. It was as if they were looking into a mirror reflecting a different version of themselves. Finally, Michael spoke. His voice trembled slightly. I think we need to talk. For hours afterward, Sarah sat quietly beside them and listened. Michael spoke about his childhood, about a mother who rarely discussed the past, about a grandmother who had accidentally revealed the story of a baby boy given away shortly after birth, about family secrets that everyone seemed determined to avoid. Ethan listened to every word. A new emotion appeared in his eyes, not pain, not despair, but disbelief. For 41 years, he had believed he was completely alone. No parents, no siblings, no roots, no history. And now a stranger sat across from him, revealing missing pieces of his life he never knew existed. That afternoon, the hospital conducted DNA testing. At the same time, they completed every medical evaluation necessary for organ donation. The waiting that followed felt endless. 3 days, then 4. Every time Sarah's phone vibrated, her heart skipped. Every time a doctor entered the hallway, she held her breath. Meanwhile, Ethan's condition continued to deteriorate. He could barely leave his bed. The pain came more frequently. Each time Sarah saw him force a smile just to reassure her, she had to look away to hide her tears. Then came the 5th day. The door to Ethan's room opened. The head physician entered carrying a thick file. Her expression was so serious that Sarah felt a chill run through her body. No one spoke. No one even seemed willing to breathe. The doctor looked at Ethan, then at Michael. Finally, a slow smile appeared on her face. A smile Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. The DNA results are back. The room seemed to freeze. You are biological brothers. Tears instantly filled Ethan's eyes. He lowered his head. His hands trembled uncontrollably. Michael turned away, trying to hide the redness in his own eyes. But the surprise wasn't over. The doctor opened the file again. The compatibility testing is also complete. Sarah stopped breathing. The match is exceptionally strong, far beyond the minimum requirement. The doctor smiled. I can confidently say that Michael is the best donor candidate we have. In that moment, Sarah broke down, not with tears of despair, but with relief. After months of living in darkness, they could finally see light again. Ethan looked at his brother. A brother he hadn't even known existed a few days earlier. A brother who had emerged from the shadows of the past like a miracle. Michael smiled softly. It seems our mother took a lot of years away from us. He paused, but at least she left us this chance. Ethan couldn't find the words. Instead, he reached out his hand. Michael took it firmly. 2 men, 2 completely different lives, separated for more than 4 decades, now reunited by the very thing they had both lost, family. The surgery was scheduled for later that same week. Everything moved quickly. There was no time left for hesitation, no room for second chances. The night before the operation, Sarah sat between the two brothers in Ethan's hospital room. Outside, Seattle rain once again streaked across the windows. Droplets slid slowly down the glass like old memories being washed away. For the first time in months, nobody spoke about death. Nobody spoke about loss, because every thought was focused on one thing: tomorrow. The day that could save Ethan's life, or change all of their lives forever. Life can change in just a few hours. Only days earlier, Sarah had been sitting in a hospital room preparing herself for the worst. Now she stood outside the recovery unit after surgery, waiting for a new beginning. The transplant operation lasted nearly an entire day. Those hours became the longest of Sarah's life. She sat in the waiting room, not eating, not sleeping, simply watching the clock move forward 1 minute at a time. Michael was there too, the man who had only recently discovered he had a younger brother, and the man who had just given that brother a chance to keep living. The two sat side by side, speaking very little, because some emotions are simply too large for words. When the doors to the operating room finally opened, both of them jumped to their feet. The surgeon stepped out. Exhaustion was written across his face after hours of nonstop work. Then he smiled. The surgery was successful. Sarah burst into tears immediately. Months of pressure, months of fear, months of living with despair, everything came pouring out at once. For the first time in a very long while, she allowed herself to believe there was still a future waiting for them. The weeks that followed were not easy. No miracle happened overnight. Ethan still had to fight every single day. He endured pain, countless tests, endless examinations. But this time, everything felt different because there was finally light at the end of the road. And Ethan was no longer walking that road alone. One morning at the beginning of winter, Sarah entered his hospital room and stopped in her tracks. Michael was sitting beside the bed. An old cardboard box rested in his lap. Inside were dozens of photographs faded by time, family photographs. Memories from a life Ethan had never known. Ethan carefully picked them up one by one, studying each image in silence. There were photographs of his biological mother when she was young, pictures of Michael as a child, family snapshots preserved for decades. For the first time in his life, Ethan was looking at people who shared his blood. Tears rolled down his face, not because he was in pain, but because he finally knew where he came from. Several weeks later, another visitor arrived at the hospital. Her name was Rebecca, Michael's half-sister and Ethan's sister as well. The moment she learned the truth about her long-lost brother, she drove for hours to reach Seattle. Their reunion wasn't dramatic. There were no grand speeches, no emotional confrontations, just long embraces, quiet tears, and a sense that a loss spanning more than 4 decades had finally begun to heal. By the following spring, Ethan was discharged from the hospital. His health steadily improved. Color returned to his face. Laughter returned to the little house. Charlie once again raced around the yard the way he always had. Everything seemed to be healing. One weekend afternoon, Sarah sat on the porch, watching Ethan and Michael repair the front fence together. The brothers argued, then laughed, then argued again, like two men who had grown up side by side their entire lives. No one would have guessed that just 1 year earlier, they had been complete strangers. A little later, Ethan walked over and sat beside Sarah. He took her hand, the same way he had done countless times before. "You know something?" Sarah turned toward him. Ethan smiled. "I used to think I was the loneliest person in the world. I thought I had no family, no roots, no place where I truly belonged." His eyes drifted toward Michael standing in the yard, filled with gratitude. "But it turns out I was wrong." Sarah rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the familiar warmth she had once feared losing forever. Sometimes life doesn't give us answers right away. Sometimes it takes away our hope, our faith. It even makes us believe that everything is over. But sometimes, at the darkest moment imaginable, another door opens. 1 year after the surgery, the entire family gathered in Astoria. The ocean breeze swept across the shoreline. Waves rolled gently against the boats resting in the harbor. Michael, Rebecca, Sarah, Ethan, and Charlie. All of them sat around a long wooden table. laughing together as though they had always belonged in each other's lives. No one could recover the years that had been lost. No one could change the past, but they could still write the future. And sometimes, that is what matters most. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. Do you believe family is created by blood or by love? And if you enjoy emotional stories about family, hidden secrets, and second chances, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Because sometimes a single story can change the way we see life and remind us that hope never truly disappears, even when we believe it has been gone for a very long time. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Do you believe family is defined by blood or by the people who choose to stand beside us when life gets hard? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more emotional family stories, unexpected reunions, and inspiring second chances to life. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next unforgettable story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.